Welcome back. Today I'm starting actual work on this SX-64. If you haven't watched part 1 of the series in which I talk about the project, there's a link in the corner and in the notes below. Now today's goal is to do the user port fix, remove the back of the computer, check out the power board, do some cleaning, and maybe, if I'm really ambitious, change out the electrolytic capacitors. I've gotten away from changing caps as a general practice, but the SX is just, it's harder to work on than a bread bin or a VIC or a 128, so I think I might just do it while I'm in there. So I'm going to start with the user port fix, and I'll explain the point of that in a minute, but first I need to get the connector board off. Okay, so to get the connector board off, there's only 3 screws, but we do have some wires running off of here. We've got this ribbon cable going over to the I/O board, and we've got some wires coming off here that are going to go through this plastic zip tie and over there. So, let me just say at this point that if you don't know exactly where the wires are supposed to go, it is a very good idea before you start taking things apart to take pictures of the inside of the machine from lots of different angles so you can always tell where the wires were supposed to go. Okay. Now I'm going to start by removing the ribbon cable, and it's just going to be easier to pull it off the I/O board, so I'm going to reach over there and do that. Okay. That's loose. Now, we have wires here that run through this zip tie. So I'm going to cut that zip tie very, very carefully. I want to make sure that I don't cut any of those wires. This wire here actually goes down to the power board, but it's kind of in the way, so I'm going to go ahead with 2. Again, my I/O board here is really loose because if you watch the last video, we took it out to try to get it pushed back into the main board here for testing. We'll get to that board in a different video. Okay, now let's separate these out, see what we've got running where. Okay. Looks like this whole bundle comes over here, and some go over here, and some go here. Okay. That one's being a bit difficult. This is my chip puller. Just kind of got in there and gave that a little bit of a gentle twist to get it started. Now that's loose. All of our wires up top are removed, so we can pull the screws. And drop them right down in the case. It's okay. The good thing about a project like this is we're going to get down there to that spot in a minute anyway. We'll get it then. Okay. So now we can carefully just remove the entire board. Okay, now that we've got the board off, let's just take a quick look at it here. We've got our 2 joystick ports, or control ports. We've got video and serial, and apparently a dead spider. So, Requiem for an Arachnid. And then over here we've got the user port. Now the important thing that we need to look at though is on the underside. Especially we're looking at pins 19 and 20. Okay. And I'm going to put this under a magnifying glass so we can look at this a little bit closer. Okay, now if you look carefully between pins 19 and 20, you can see what looks to be like a lighter green area between those two pins. That's actually making an electrical connection. And that's not supposed to be there. Apparently that exists on every single SX-64, but it is a manufacturing error. Here's the relevant part of the SX schematics. And you can see that pin 19, which I've indicated here with a red arrow, carries 9 volts AC. And pin 20, which I've indicated with the blue arrow, runs to ground. This is the same arrangement that we see on the breadbin and 64C models. Here's the schematic from the 469 board, and you can see that pin 11 carries 9 volts and pin 12 runs to ground. So this is how the SX was designed. It is not, however, how the SX was built. For some reason, the AC and the ground pins are connected. This means that if you try to use a device in the user port, such as a modem or an EEPROM programmer, you could seriously damage the device and the computer. This is a significant screw-up on Commodore's part. Now, I have not seen any recall notice or memos to repair centers or anything like that for this issue. If anyone knows of one, I'd love to see it. It's not mentioned in the Tech Topics series that was sent to the dealers. It is not mentioned in the SX User's Guide, nor in the manuals for the 1600 or 1670 modems. And the 1670 modem specifically says for use in the SX-64. It is mentioned in some third-party documents, such as this one, which I found on Ray Carlsen's site from the manufacturer of an EEPROM programmer. It specifically mentions this issue and says, quote, serious damage to your SX-64 will result. Now, interestingly, the document uses the pin numbers from the C64 boards, not the ones from the SX board. I'll put a link to this document below if you're interested in reading the entire thing. Now, at least this is an easy fix. All you have to do is sever the connection by cutting the trace between those pins. I've got my multimeter here set to continuity mode, and we can see if we touch pins 19 and 20, we definitely do have an electrical connection. So let's fix that. Okay, let's do this. For the record, I hate doing this because I'm always afraid I'm going to screw something up. But, oh well, got to be done. So, I'm going to get in here with a X-Acto knife. And I apologize if I get in the way of the video. I'm just going to make a couple of slices here between those two. And now let's verify that we do not have an electrical connection between those two pins. Multimeter in here again. Oh, still have a connection. Didn't do a good enough job. Okay, let's try again. Still have a connection. Okay, so I went off camera to finish this. I had to go a lot deeper than I thought I was going to have to go. You know, I've cut a lot of traces before, and generally it's a quick slice with a X-Acto knife or something, and that's all there is to it. Really had to go deep with this one and dig in there to get past the copper underneath there. You can still see there's some copper exposed, but hopefully you can see that there is a gap between the copper and the pin. See if I can get in here and point this out and still hold it to the camera. So there's a gap on this side, hopefully you can see that, separating now these two pins, so there's no continuity. But I really had to go a lot deeper than I expected I was going to have to go. Okay, so just to demonstrate here, I've got my multimeter in continuity mode. So now when I touch these two pins, nothing, which is exactly what we want. Alright, now you may have noticed as I was moving this around that this brown wire came loose. But not a big deal, because I know exactly where it goes, right there where it says brown. Okay, so all I'm going to do is just solder that back on, but to be a little more on the safe side, I'm going to put a bunch of zip ties on these wires and kind of hold them together a little bit more so I don't accidentally pull off any more. Alright, so the brown wire is back in place. One thing to note about the way these are soldered on is they're actually through hole. So you have to strip the wire up a little bit, stick it all the way through the PCB, and solder it on the other side. And I've also cleaned off the user port here with just a pencil eraser, and I'm going to give it a shot of contact cleaner before I reassemble everything. Okay, now let's take a look at the power board. In order to get to that, we got to take this whole back assembly off, which is actually pretty easy. Those two screws that were back here holding the top part of the case on also hold the top part of this back piece on. So there are two screws in the bottom corners that need to come out. And then we'll be able to remove this entire back unit. Well, we'll be able to slide it off a little ways. We got to take some connectors off before we can remove it completely. Okay. Now we just very carefully move it out. Now you'll see we do have some wires here we have to watch. Over on this side we've got a couple of green ones that are grounding to the case. We've got a brown and a black. This is going to run all the way up here to the CRT through this little clamp. So I'm not going to actually take that off of the CRT, but I can take it out of the clamp. Well, it looks like that's not really going to help me unless I take the floppy drive board off, so we'll just leave that there. We've already removed this one, so we can just pull these two off and take those screws out. This one has a handy little clip. this one does too, but it's underneath. Tell you what, I'm going to take these green ones off first. That'll let me have a little more room to move around and get over there underneath that other one. Kind of hard to get under there to do that. There we go. All right. You readjust everything on the workbench here. Okay, now these brown and black wires don't actually run all the way into the CRT. They come into this little connector here, right here. So I'm just going to pull that apart, take it out of the little clamp there, and remove the power supply unit completely. All right, now you can see the power board's hidden underneath this metal shield. Now we could get the shield off easy enough, but I want to get that whole thing out of there. So to start with, there's a screw down here that I can't get to unless I remove the power switch. I can't easily remove the power switch unless I remove this metal shield here first. So that's what we're going to start with. And there's nice cutouts to allow the screwdriver to get in here. So the screws I need to remove are this one, this one, this one. I got to get this power switch out first. Now this should just push right out, but I'm going to be real careful pushing on this thing because this is old plastic and I don't want the clips to break. So I'm going to do that off camera very, very carefully, knowing that my hands are kind of all over it and you wouldn't be able to see anything anyway. Okay, so I was able to push this out. Very careful. All I really did was, you can see there's two push clips on either side, and I just very carefully took a flathead screwdriver and pushed in on those as I was pushing out on the switch assembly, and it popped out without any damage at all, which is really good. Okay, now I can get into this screw. 3 on the bottom. And out she comes. There are wires still connected here, so I got to be careful. And there is your SX-64 power supply. Okay. So let's take a look at what we've got here. We've got this massive electrolytic capacitor here, 200 volts, 470 microfarad. You know, obviously none of these caps are bulging or leaking or anything. Otherwise the computer wouldn't work. So honestly, I think I'm just probably going to leave them the way they are and not mess with them. But you can see here we've got a 5-volt board and a 12-volt board. We've got a couple of potentiometers on each. This one says 5-volt adjust. This one says OC. I'm not entirely sure what that is. This also says OC, and this one is 12-volt adjust. I'm not going to mess with either one of them. Flip it up like this. A couple more huge capacitors. You know, honestly, it looks like a fairly typical power supply board. I don't see anything about this that's particularly remarkable. Everything looks to be in good shape. So, yeah, it's not even very dirty. Probably lift this out of that shield very, very carefully. Let's see here. A couple little clips that are holding it on. Little clips that are sticking through the board in a few places. Trying to be really careful here. Here's the back side, and the back side looks pretty dirty, actually. We're definitely going to clean that off. But otherwise, not anything particularly remarkable, I don't think. Yes, this is okay. This is kind of interesting. Here on that metal shield, we've got some electrical information. This is a model SR34. Output 9 volts AC at 0.2 amps and 5 volt DC at 3.15 amps and 12 volt DC at 2.76 amps. Your date code there, 43WZ. I have no idea what that means. I'm sure somebody else out there does and can put that in the comments below. But I don't have a clue. Now, I'm not going to bother showing you all the cleaning that I'm going to do on this thing because, frankly, that's boring. But basically, it's just isopropyl alcohol, paper towel, Q-tips. That's pretty much it. There's no great secrets to this. Okay, you can see here, I'm in the process of cleaning this off. On the bottom of the here, a lot of thermal paste, all this white stuff. And what that does is that is transferring some of the heat from the board into the metal, into this steel piece here, and then up against the back frame of the computer. So you can see down in here the white residue. So we're going to clean all of that off as well. You can see that this part up here cleaned off pretty well. I'm going to go over that with some contact cleaner once more before I'm done. But I just wanted to point out all of this thermal paste that's under here. So if you do disassemble this thing, or an SX at some point, make sure before you put it back together that you put some new thermal paste on here. Okay, so here's the unit all back together again and ready to go back on the computer. But it's going to have to wait a while because I'm not going to start reassembling this thing until I'm done with all the work that I'm going to do on it. That way it gives me a little bit of extra room to work inside the case. Next up is going to be a quick look at the drive board, and then I'm going to remove the storage bay and the floppy drive. I'm going to clean the heads, lube the rails, change the belt on the drive, and talk a little bit about the difference between the floppy drive in the SX and a standard 1541, because they are basically the same thing. All the chips can be swapped between the two. The hardware can be swapped, but there are some differences. So if you have an SX with a dead drive mechanism, you can swap out one from a regular 1541, but you got to make a few changes. We'll talk about those next time as well. So until then, thanks for watching.